Good evening. I'm Yamiche Alcindor coming to you from the NBC News Bureau in Washington, D.C. And here are some of the stories we're following now tonight.
We have a mother and a father who mourn the life of a young man who should be here today.
A community comes together to celebrate the life of Tyre Nichols, the black man who died 3 days after being beaten by Memphis police officers. Then the FBI searches the vacation home of President Biden for more classified documents. His lawyers say none were found, but that doesn't mean investigators left empty-handed.
We're not going to get ahead of potential speculation and steps that could happen in the investigation. The president's been fully cooperative.
A field of Republican candidates is slowly emerging to challenge former President Donald Trump in 2024. We examine where some potential contenders are coming from. Plus, a vicious ice storm leaves more than 250,000 people without power in Texas as parts of the state experience temperatures colder than Alaska. And after intense criticism from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, the College Board chooses the first day of Black History Month to announce it's watering down its new AP African American Studies course.
Now, who would say that an important part of Black history is queer theory? That is somebody pushing an agenda on our kids.
Tyre Nichols has now been laid to rest in Memphis, Tennessee. Earlier today, family and friends remembered Nichols in an emotional service. The funeral was attended by many, including Vice President Kamala Harris and the Reverend Al Sharpton, who delivered the eulogy. Throughout the service, speakers demanded that Congress pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act.
We demand that Congress pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Joe Biden will sign it. And we should not delay, and we will not be denied. It is non-negotiable.
There is no accountability. They feel that we are going to get angry a day or two and then we're going on to something else. But some of us do this every day. Some of us believe in the dream has to come true. Some of us are going to fight until we make this legislation happen. I don't know when, I don't know how, but we won't stop until we hold you accountable and change the system.
We're going to start counting. We can count to 20, and every time you kill one of us on video, we're going to say the legacy of Tyre Nichols is that we have equal justice swiftly.
Very powerful words there. 29-year-old Nichols was brutally beaten by members of the Memphis Police Department during a traffic stop on January 7th. He died 3 days later. Last week, videos of the incident were released, prompting protests across the country and renewing calls for police reform. 5 police officers, all black, have been fired since and charged with multiple felonies, including second-degree murder. 2 other officers have been relieved of duty, and 3 EMTs have been fired. NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton joins me now from Memphis. So, Antonia, this was an incredibly emotional service. I remember his sister talking about how he liked to watch TV and eat cereal while she was babysitting him. He's also named after the character in the movie Silverado. His mother was also emotional, talking about, though, the need for police reform. What more did we hear today?
You know, Yamiche, some of those small moments that you just mentioned there, they really stuck out to me because whenever these cases become, national news and there's so much attention on the investigation, looking at the history of the police department, sometimes the details of the life that this person led, they fade into the background. And so some of those moments, just hearing about the cereal that he liked to eat, that he was a fun kid to babysit, things like that, it just reminded you of some of the simple sort of universal elements of this. And of course, it made you feel for the family and just how much pain that they're in right now. And so this service was an interesting combination of, people wrapping their arms, surrounding this family in love and remembrances of the life that he led, but also this desire to make sure that he didn't die in vain. And so it wasn't just Vice President Harris, it was virtually every speaker who stood up there today got rounds of applause, standing ovations, talking about the various levels of reform they feel are needed here at the local level and at the federal level. You know, locally, they're still pushing for additional people, including some of these new officers, one who's been named, Officer Preston Hemphill, another who remains unnamed, who've been relieved of duty but not yet charged with anything, and then these 3 EMTs, 2 EMTs and 1 lieutenant who worked with them. They want to see them charged, and they see all of the folks who were on the scene that night as playing a role that ultimately led to his death. And so the funeral was incredibly moving, but it also had this sort of larger message, as so often Black churches do. They try to remind you that, you know, they're part of this long history of protest, of moving this country forward, and this funeral was absolutely no exception to that, Yamiche.
And as you sort of really lay out how this is moving forward, I think of Benjamin Crump talking about how this should be the blueprint for what happens next if there are other police killings. We now have reports that 4 of the 5 officers charged in Nichols' death, that they had prior violations at work, meaning that they were, at least the people said that they did things that were wrong at work. Talk about whether or not the Memphis Police Department is commenting on that, and how much more do we know about the 7th officer?
There's a lot we still hope to know, and a lot of reporters who are trying to get answers both from the police department and potentially from the DA's office as well on these. But here's what we know from the records NBC News has obtained. 4 of those 5 officers have a history of infractions. And those infractions range from failing to fill out important paperwork about incidents that they've been involved in to use of force issues. And then one incident that really stuck out to me, Yamiche, was that one of the officers has a history of reckless driving himself. Reckless driving being what, of course, precipitated or was the allegation that led to Tyre Nichols being pulled over in the first place. This officer allegedly in speeding to the scene of a call that he received, caused a 3-car crash and had to be relieved of duty for 2 days and sent to a remedial driving course. And so, you know, that example, which was just one of many, hit home because it reminds you that what Tyre Nichols was alleged to have done that night, it led to this execution. And that's been something that's incredibly painful for residents here to process. As, you know, they tried to move forward to this funeral, tried to celebrate his life. It feels like every day additional details about what people in the police department or at other levels of government might have known.
And Antonio, just such incredible details there. I also think we should note that when we talk about this service, we saw families of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Eric Garner and so many other families that have been touched by what they see as police violence. So I really appreciate you reporting down there. I know it's a tough job.
Thank you.
Let's now bring in Vicki Terry. She's the executive director of the NAACP's Memphis branch and was at Tyre Nichols' funeral today. So, Vicki, I want to play a portion of what Reverend Al Sharpton's eulogy said. He was talking about the officers involved. Listen to this.
5 black men that wouldn't have had a job in the police department would not ever be thought of to be in an elite squad. In the city that Dr. King lost his life, not far away from that balcony, you beat a brother to death.
I have to tell you, I talked to folks who said they got goosebumps thinking about the fact that some of these officers that are now charged are the beneficiaries of the work of civil rights leaders like Al Sharpton, like Martin Luther King. What's your response to what Reverend Sharpton was talking about there? And how is the community dealing with this?
You know, before you even showed that clip, I was sitting here thinking about some of the same things that your correspondent had said about what she heard in the funeral, and that stood out to me because I can remember when Dr. King was killed here. I was 8 years old, and it just resonated with me. It brought tears to my eyes just thinking about those 5 officers, black men, who beat this young man to death. And that, you know, it just seems so horrific, you know, for them to have done this. Our community is suffering. You know, we know the family is how they feel, but the whole community here in Memphis, Tennessee we are all just distraught about what happened. And it's almost unbelievable that these officers who were supposed to serve and protect us did this to Tyre.
And as you use the word unbelievable, it is such a poignant word to use in this moment, because so many people just cannot believe what we all witnessed in this video. I want to ask you, I mean, there's so many calls for police reform now. President Biden has said it's going to have to be up to Congress. I'm wondering, though, on the local level, on a lot of the level where you're working there, whether or not you think local police departments can do something to prevent what we saw happen in the case of Tyre Nichols.
Yes, ma'am, I do. I certainly do. I think that what we need to do is develop some sort of liaison between the police department and the community. We need people working together with them, making sure that they are held accountable for the things that they're doing. And I know our police chief, she has already brought in a new internal affairs a person that's over them. I don't know if the other one got fired or what, but we have a new internal affairs chief. And I know that these complaints will be looked at personally now, because of this new person. There were so many different things that were happening with the Scorpion unit and other units that it needed to be disbanded, and it needs to be, looked into to make sure that there aren't other incidents that have gone by and nobody knew about.
And I also want to ask you, when it comes to the bills that are being looked at, there's the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Today we heard that Congressman Sheila Jackson Lee might be pushing a legislation named after Tyre Nichols to really require police officers to intervene. How important are those types of things, those measures, when you think about the work that needs to be done?
Oh, my goodness. It needs to happen now. That is so important. We have got to make sure that this law, the George Floyd Act, is passed. And then, as she said about a Tyre Nichols reform, I think Memphis, we are the blueprint, as Ben Crump said, Attorney Crump has said. Memphis is the blueprint for making these things happen. And what we've got to do is to make sure that we keep pushing our legislators here in Tennessee to make sure that these things are happening, and that, our state representatives, Congressman Steve Cohen, all of these people, we need to make sure that we stay on them to make sure that all of these acts are followed and will be into legislation, because right now we don't have anything, on the books as far as police reform.
Yeah, and of course, so many people at the funeral that you attended said just that. So thank you so much, Vicki Terry, Executive Director of the NAACP Memphis branch.
Thank you. Thank you.
The FBI searched another of President Biden's properties for classified documents today. This time, it was his home in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. According to the president's personal attorney, Bob Bauer, no new documents with classified markings were found. Bauer said the DOJ did retrieve some, quote, materials and handwritten notes that appear to relate to his time as vice president. The spokesman for the White House counsel's office stressed this was all done in coordination from the president's legal team.
This is consistent, I think, with the president from the very beginning of having total cooperation with the Justice Department as it goes through this ongoing investigation, and that will continue. The president is moving quickly to get them access to the information that they need so that they can move forward with a thorough review that's thorough and that's done efficiently. So
let's bring in NBC's chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander. So thank you so much for being here, Peter. So what more do we know about what the DOJ found today?
Yeah, so let's walk you through this, right? The president's lawyer says, as you note significantly, that no documents with markings that are classified were found there. This was after about a 3.5-hour search. They say that the search was done with the president's full support and cooperation. Again, as you highlight, materials and handwritten notes were among those items that were taken for review by the FBI. But notably, Yamiche, this comes after the revelation that the FBI searched Mr. Biden's former private office back in November, according to two sources. Law enforcement sources, but the White House didn't share that information with the public. And tonight, the president's aides, they argue that unlike former President Trump, they did hand back all classified documents immediately. So the White House has not said why they didn't tell the public about the FBI's November search and whether others have not been revealed. Yamiche.
And Peter, even if there are no classified documents, it seems, being found today, I wonder, is there any of that material? Could it possibly violate any sort of laws, the material that they did take?
Yeah, it's a good question. That's part of why this investigation by Robert Hur, the special counsel, is underway. He officially began his effort today. What is significant as we talk about Robert Hur, who's a former U.S. attorney from the state of Maryland, is that the Biden administration says it has been working with the DOJ, that has handed their documents as they found them directly over the archives, that they have spoken and fully cooperated with the FBI. But there are real questions tonight on the issue of transparency, with the Republican head of the House Oversight Committee effectively saying we wouldn't know anything about this if it wasn't leaked to the media right now. As it relates to whether any laws were broken, the White House, the president's private lawyer, they insist nothing was done wrong here. They say it was an inadvertent effort. It was all effectively a mistake.
And as they're saying it's a mistake, and the White House has said over and over again that they're in coordination, in cooperation with the DOJ. If that's happening, do we expect more searches?
It's a good question. I tried to ask that gentleman you saw, Ian Sams. He is the spokesperson for the White House Special Counsel's office. I asked him whether the White House was aware of any other FBI searches at any other properties. We now know that the White House, that the FBI has searched the president's former office here in D.C., his Wilmington home, where they found classified material after the president's lawyers found classified documents, as well as the search that took place at the Rehoboth Beach house for the president. But that spokesperson wouldn't say anything beyond saying that they are working directly with the Department of Justice and trying to participate as best possible in helping them complete their investigation. Yamiche.
Well, it's a situation that is clearly continuing to evolve and develop. So thank you, Peter Alexander, for all that reporting.
Thank you, Yamiche.
Still to come, some big changes at the southern border, what the end of a COVID-era immigration policy could mean for people seeking asylum. Plus, the College Board is changing its curriculum for AP African American Studies after some Republican backlash. Now Tonight continues next. Today, the College Board released an updated curriculum for its new advanced placement course on African American Studies. The update here means stripped of Black writers and scholars associated with critical race theory and the Black queer experience. This comes after a slew of criticism from Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis, he's a Republican, who claims the original framework for the AP course pushed a, quote, left-wing bias amounting to, quote, indoctrination. But the head of the College Board said this did not make any of these changes as concessions to conservatives, telling the New York Times, quote, at the College Board, we can't look to statements of political leaders. Still, the revised syllabus for the course appears to address many of the criticisms Governor DeSantis had with the course. And many of the authors who wrote about issues DeSantis took exception with are gone and are no longer part of the curriculum. NBC News correspondent Ron Allen joins us now with more. So, Ron, how does this new framework differ from the old one?
Well, according to the College Board, it focuses on what it describes as core issues and facts and people and history and primary sources, whereas the old framework or the revised framework focused on secondary sources, focused on theory, focused on ideas and contemporary issues like the Black Lives Matter movement, reparations, these kinds of contemporary issues. There are several authors whose names have been removed, like Kimberly Crenshaw, who writes about critical race theory, and Ta-Nehisi Coates, who writes a lot about reparations and many other things. He's probably one of the most popular Black authors in contemporary times now. So, and obviously this is an academic debate, so there's a lot of room for interpretation of what a lot of these issues, these topics mean, like what exactly is critical race theory and what isn't. But the bottom line is that the folks like DeSantis and his supporters are arguing for a much different kind of Black history, look at Black history, than others. And the College Board, its critics would say, is caving to that political pressure. It says it consulted hundreds of experts in African American history, and they came up with this, and they say it's non-political. They said things like everyone's voice is heard. But the opponents, of course, are saying that that's not the case, and there are hundreds of Black scholars who are saying just the opposite. So all this will be sorted out in Florida, but remember, of course, this is a national issue. The College Board is creating a course that will be taught in schools across the country. It will be taken by students who are trying to get credit for AP courses and take an exam, and that, of course, to translate into college credit. So there's a lot at stake. And I would suspect that going forward, since this is still in the trial phase, if you will, the pilot phase, that there's going to be a lot of debate at school boards and superintendents' offices and with parents across the country trying to understand exactly what they can teach, what they can't teach, and what will help their students get these AP credits and pass these exams and get college credit and perhaps an advantage in terms of college admission. So there's a lot at stake. And of course, we're just getting into the beginnings of the 2024 campaign, which is why Ron DeSantis is so prominent in all this, because obviously he's expected to run for president. So the beginning of Black Heritage Month is off to quite a start.
Definitely a bumpy start when you're talking about taking away bell hooks, Angela Davis, Ta-Nehisi Coates. That said, you mentioned Republican Governor Ron DeSantis. Has he approved this curriculum yet? How likely is it that he's going to move forward with this?
We've not heard directly from him. It's a very extensive syllabus and an expensive document that the College Board has produced, so I was expecting it will take some time for DeSantis, the state of Florida, and others to weigh in on this, as some have to begin with. The College Board also said that a lot of these topics that are not prominent and that are not required, like the work of some of the authors that we were just mentioning, that students can look at these subjects as independent research at the end of the course, and that there are independent research projects that they can select from a wide range of topics, many of them contemporary issues, and that work will be eligible for credit. And so that's how they're kind of making this compromise, trying to separate what's in the core course versus what's in independent study. They're trying to satisfy a lot of voices, a lot of very passionate voices. And again, this is not going to go away anytime soon.
It's definitely not going to go away anytime soon. Definitely an interesting start to Black History Month. So thank you so much, NBC News' Ron Allen. And the president's decision to lift public health emergency for COVID in May, it could also mean the end of a policy that blocked more than 2 million people, or 2 million border crossings. We're talking here about Title 42, the Trump-era policy that was put in place back in March 2020. It allows the U.S. to expel migrants over public health concerns, in this instance, COVID. Right now, 20 states are suing the Biden administration to keep the policy in place. Notably, 10 of the states don't have any sort of land or sea borders. That being said, only 2 states border Mexico. The Supreme Court made a temporary decision to keep the policy in place while this case plays out. The question now is what happens if Title 42 winds down before the court makes its decision? To help us answer some of this is Julia Ainsley. She's NBC News' Homeland Security correspondent, and she joins me now. Thank you so much, Julia, for being here. So tell me, what could happen at the southern border if Title 42 is lifted?
Well, Yamiche, for over a year now, there's been a prediction that when Title 42 lifts, we'll see a surge of migrants. Mainly, this is pent-up demand, people who couldn't cross the border since March of 2020 without being sent back into Mexico. We know that Central Americans and Mexicans, by and large, have been those most affected by Title 42. And in some places along the border, they're not all, there are large migrant camps of people trying to get in. This is not just because of U.S. border policy, but because of Western Hemisphere migration. Right now, there are 2.5 million Venezuelans living in Colombia. There are a lot of political turmoil throughout the hemisphere. Climate change is impacting this, and it's all coming at a time where if these COVID-19 restrictions lift, known as Title 42, it could serve as a magnet. And that is why Republicans have been vocally against lifting Title 42.
And as you break that down, we know that the Supreme Court is weighing the future of Title 42. You've covered this a lot. I wonder what's the status of that case and what would happen if the court doesn't make a decision by May 11th?
Well, it's interesting, and they probably won't make a decision by May 11th. We know that they'll hear oral arguments March 1st, but because this is one of the more controversial opinions that they'll issue this term, we could be looking at late June by the time we actually hear a decision. But what could change is that the Biden administration is now trying a new route for lifting it. In the past, they tried to lift the Title 42 by saying that the CDC no longer found it necessary. Now they're using more of an umbrella way of doing this by saying, look, the entire public health emergency around COVID-19 has lifted, and therefore, the way Title 42 was written, it is no longer applicable. They're extending this to May 11th. However, there are some Republicans that tried to end the public health emergency yesterday. I don't know for sure if they knew that that would also mean lifting Title 42 and going against 20 Republican states that are suing to keep it in place. So if the Biden administration goes ahead and tries to lift this by May 11th, the Supreme Court will be in a position where they will have to decide whether or not that lifting is in violation of the injunction they put in place in December that kept it from lifting. And then we'll see if we have another lawsuit from Republicans to try to keep it in place or what happens next. There are a lot of hypotheticals, a lot of places this could go, but it definitely could end with Title 42 lifting either on May 11th or later in the summer or continuing for even longer.
Well, a lot of moving parts, and of course, there's a lot of political tension here. So thanks so much, NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ansley. And after the break, a manhunt turned standoff, an update on the man accused of kidnapping and torturing a woman in Oregon, and a look at dangerous winter weather conditions in the South.
How was your drive?
Terrifying. We seen two cars south of the street. One car swerved and almost hit us, and then we made our way up here, coming up these hills.
It's now time for some of the big headlines we're watching tonight. Benjamin Foster, the suspect of an attempted murder and kidnapping case, is now dead after an intense standoff with SWAT teams. Police in Grants Pass, Oregon, say Foster shot himself while barricaded inside a home. He's been on the run since last week after a woman was found nearly beaten to death in the area. Now, police say Foster was also behind the murders of two men in a nearby town.
Very near the location where Mr. Foster was initially holed up on Thursday night, we discovered a double homicide scene. At this point, we do believe Benjamin Foster is the suspect of that double homicide.
Congressman George Santos is being investigated by the FBI for his possible role in an online fundraising scheme. Allegedly, Santos stole thousands of dollars raised through a GoFundMe intended to cover a life-saving surgery for a service dog for a veteran. Santos's office did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Newly proposed legislation in Massachusetts is looking to grant early release to inmates who donate organs or bone marrow. If passed, the bill could shorten sentences to up to 1 year for people who qualify. However, it is possible the bill might violate federal law according to restrictions in the National Organ Transplant Act of 1984. A pandemic-era boost to SNAP benefits will be going away by the end of the month. For nearly 3 years, participating low-income households were allotted at least an extra $95 a month for groceries. 18 states have already halted the additional boost, but now the remaining states will follow suit. The move is the result of a late revision made to the omnibus spending bill. And Australian officials are breathing a sigh of relief after locating a missing radioactive capsule. Last month, the tiny but potentially deadly capsule fell off a truck in the Australian outback, sending search crews into a frantic hunt. Special equipment eventually detected radiation from the pea-sized object, which led authorities to its location on the side of the road. At least 8 people are dead from the winter storm wreaking havoc in the South. So this is what we're seeing. Icy and snowy roads are causing dangerous driving conditions and flight conditions. Some areas of Texas are reporting up to a ½ inch of ice and roughly a ¼ inch in parts of Tennessee and Arkansas. And it might not sound like a lot, but that much ice, it can do serious damage. Residents captured footage of extensive tree damage caused by the weight of the ice, and electrical sparks lit up dark skies as a result of downed power lines. As of right now, thousands are without power in Texas. And NBC News' Morgan Chesky, you joined us now from Texas, from Dallas. So Morgan, how are people in Texas dealing with this weather, and what are you seeing?
Yeah, Yamiche, it is day 3 in this deep freeze, and conditions absolutely miserable. Sleet has turned to rain temporarily, but that will likely freeze in just a few hours. As you mentioned, that death toll has risen. 7 of those 8 deaths happening here in Texas, another in Arkansas. But it has been the ice accumulation that's proven to be so devastating all across the state. We know at last check, about 350,000 Texans are without power. Austin hit especially hard Walmart. 1 in 4 customers there facing a very frigid darkness as we enter nightfall. And that is why there's a real concern that even though temperatures are expected to rise tomorrow, we're definitely not out of the woods yet. Yamiche?
As you said, this is sort of a devastating situation right now in Texas. So I wonder, how are state and local officials, how are they dealing with this? How are they responding?
Well, they're warning people to stay off the roadways. For those people who maybe do lose power and don't have anywhere else to go, I would like to share one of the resources they're asking people to take a look at. This is a place where you can find a warming shelter nearby. They have proven to be absolutely critical. In fact, we visited one earlier today. The director of the shelter told us that they had to actually expand into multiple different locations because they had more than 1,500 people, and that was just one agency in Dallas, not to mention the other parts of this state that are being absolutely pummeled by this storm that is still ongoing. Yamiche?
And Morgan, one of the things that's really making this even harder is that you see this icy weather in Texas and other southern states. So I wonder, how are city leaders trying to lean on infrastructure and trying to really use their resources to get better prepared?
Well, not every community is certainly equipped equally. We know that in certain areas, snowplows went out, tried to clear roadways as best they could, with bridges and overpasses being treated or having sand put out. But what we've been facing here, despite the best intentions infrastructure-wise, is the fact that we've had 3 sustained days now, or 3 days of sustained temperatures below freezing or right at freezing. And fortunately, a lot of people have heeded the warnings and stayed off the roadways there. But right now, because we are in Texas and not in a northern state where they do see this time and time again, people do really have to take it upon themselves to stay off the roadways. That's almost been a plea from officials. In fact, one interesting note, DFW Airport says that some of the flight cancellations aren't necessarily because planes can't take off, but they've been trying to mitigate the fact that so many people would be converging on DFW on roads that nobody has any business driving on. Yamiche?
An important message in your reporting there to just stay off the roads and try to stay as safe as possible. Thank you so much, Morgan. NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns joins us now. So, Bill, what can you tell us about this ice storm that's moving across the South?
12 to 18 more hours. Obviously, we're in day 3 now of covering this storm, and the worst of the impacts of power outages was today. The roads have been horrendous all 3 days, but today the ice really built up, especially in central Texas. The Austin area specifically has about half of all the outages in all of Texas. We don't have a ton of power outages, at least so far, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but it's really the hill country just north of Austin here. That was the worst of it up towards Waco. We still have ice storm warnings in effect that go all the way back here to Tennessee, portions of Mississippi. So we're not done yet, but tomorrow is when things will warm up and the storm will begin to head out. So we're still at 29 degrees in Dallas. The sun saved us today. The sun wasn't shining, but the rays were strong enough to go through the clouds and help to melt things around the Dallas area today. That's why you haven't heard a lot about power outages and trees down. But now that the sun is gone and now it's dark, that 29 degrees means freezing rain is going to start to accumulate. And we do think we will see some isolated power outages in that Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex as we go throughout this evening and the overnight hours. And additional ice totals anywhere between 1/10 to about 1/4 of an inch, and that's on top of all the icy conditions that are already out there. And so here's the timing of this. This is as we go through this evening and go through the overnight hours, and then notice tomorrow, finally, we see the green and the yellows. That means rain instead of freezing rain. We should be in the clear by about 1 o'clock tomorrow afternoon.
And, Bill, I was thinking about you this morning because I had to put on my thicker coat because we're getting some cold weather over on the East Coast, too. So how long can we expect that to last?
Yeah, I haven't even broken out my heavy winter coat yet, but I think I'm saving that for Friday. This cold is going to be coming down from the north. So we already have wind chill advisories and also some wind chill warnings, northern New England and areas of Minnesota up towards North Dakota. So the current temperatures, this is where the cold air is coming from, up around the Hudson Bay, -22, -18. That's the cold cold air that is heading and has its eyes set for the Northeast come Friday night and Saturday morning. That's when the worst of the cold and the gustiest winds will be there. We still think wind chill values up to -48 in Bangor, Burlington, Vermont, -42. But it's in and it is out. These temperatures will warm up significantly from late Friday night and Saturday morning. By the time we get to Sunday, Albany 41, Burlington 35, Bangor, Maine up to the 30s, Boston 40. So it's a hit and run, but it's going to be really cold when it hits.
Well, good to know that warmer weather is on the way.
Yeah.
But I also want to ask you, of course, about New York City, which saw its first snowfall today. It set a record. Am I right?
Yes. It took forever to get the first snow. Actually, the latest in the season we have ever measured for the New York City area. So we went 326 days since the last measurable snow in New York City. The old record for the latest snowfall was January 29th. So we broke that in New York. But Philadelphia, you did not break yours. Your latest ever was on February 3rd. Philly also had a dusting of snow this morning.
Well, as someone from Miami, I'm just not really looking forward to snow at all, but I take it. Thank you so much, Bill, for all your reporting. Prices at the pump and grocery store have fallen since the summer, but everything is still more expensive today than a year ago. So today, the Federal Reserve took another step to protect your bottom line. The Fed raised rates by 0.25%. This is the 8th increase since March, and Fed Chair Jerome Powell says he's going to keep going. All of this is part of the effort to get national inflation down to 2%. For the past 6 months, it's gotten better, but today's inflation rate is still too high for the Fed's liking. And frankly, American consumers aren't happy with it either. These rate hikes could help lower prices of consumer goods, but it could also be bad news if you're looking for a new car or a new home. Joining us now is NBC News business and data reporter Brian Chung. So Brian, explain this Fed hike and what's going on here.
Yeah, so the Federal Reserve moving to hike interest rates by 0.25 percentage point is pretty significant when you consider the fact that they've already been raising interest rates at the fastest clip that we've seen in many decades. And that's because of inflation at levels that we have not seen in many decades, pacing at about 9.1% in the middle of last year. It's come down a little bit since then, but broadly speaking, the Federal Reserve and the Federal Reserve Chairman Jay Powell, who you can see on the screen ahead of you, making it very clear that he says they might have to continue to raise interest rates to take care of inflation. Take a listen.
The inflation data received over the past 3 months show a welcome reduction in the monthly pace of increases. And while recent developments are encouraging, we will need substantially more evidence to be confident that inflation is on a sustained downward path.
And elsewhere in that press conference, the Fed chair said that they expect further rate increases from here, so the job not done. The last reading on inflation was 6.5%. The Fed needs to see that at 2%. That's their preference. So a long ways to go, certainly, Amish.
And Brian, as you say, it's a long ways to go. I also want to talk about the impact all this is having on housing. How do these rate hikes, what do they mean for prospective homeowners? How do they impact possibly the housing market here?
Yeah, well, I mean, all the Fed speak can be a little bit over most people's heads, but essentially what we need to know about the interest rate increase today is that it's going to keep the rates on a lot of the consumer-facing interest-bearing products high. When you think about your auto loans, when you think about your credit card rates, and also when you think about, of course, mortgages. Mortgage rates more than doubled over the course of last year to over 7%. It's come down a little bit since then. I actually spoke with one realtor in Atlanta who mentioned that even in that hot market, there's a little bit of hesitancy from some prospective home buyers. Take a listen.
Demand based upon real estate is actually made up of the number of household formation. And I think that's a lot of like a misnomer in the real estate industry. Demand has nothing to do with interest rates or anything like that. Demand has to do with household formation. And so that's what they're looking at. Hesitation is what happened, but the demand is still there. People that are capable of purchasing are still there.
And because of, again, another interest rate increase today, the Federal Reserve is likely not going to let up on those mortgage rates. So 6%, don't expect it to get back anywhere close to the 3% we saw in the pandemic, Amish.
Definitely news that you could use, especially as people are looking at new homes or new cars. So thank you so much, NBC's Brian Chung. The race for 2024 is ramping up, at least within the Republican primary. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is expected to announce her presidential bid on February 15th. Haley's announcement would make her former President Donald Trump's first official GOP opponent. And she definitely won't be the only one. Former Maryland Governor Larry Hogan has also said he is looking at and taking a close look at a potential presidential run. And let's not forget Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who has neither confirmed nor denied his 2024 ambitions, but many think he will, in fact, run. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale joins me now. So, Ali, tell us all about what you know about Nikki Haley and this announcement, and what's former President Trump saying?
Yeah, Yamiche, it's looking like we're going to have at least one more person in the field. And frankly, it's going to be more than just Nikki Haley when she gets in mid-month. Her advisor is telling me that her rollout plan starts in Charleston, South Carolina. That's where she sent an invitation today, telling supporters to meet her there for what they're calling a special announcement. But look, not surprising to anybody that she's running for president now. And it seemed like former President Trump had an inkling or an idea that this was going to happen, because this is what he said over the weekend before this invitation went out.
Nikki Haley called me the other day to talk to me. I talked to her for a little while, but I said, look, go by your heart if you want to run. She's publicly stated I would never run against my president. He was a great president. I'd never run.
Did she call you? What did she say on the call?
No, but she called me. She said she'd like to consider it.
And she was letting you know?
And I said, you should do it.
And look, Trump was highlighting again today the fact that at one point Haley did say she wouldn't run for president in 2024 if her former boss, when she was ambassador to the UN, Trump, was running. It's clear he's running, and it's also clear that she has had a change of heart there.
So interesting to hear Trump talk about Nikki Haley and her possibly promising not to run against him. Now that we know a little bit more about what's going on the Republican side, do we know if another president, President Biden, whether he's going to run? What's the Democratic field looking like possibly?
Gosh, the Democratic field is frozen because, typically, this well, you and I have done campaigns for a long time. Typically, if you are a former president or you are the president currently, you are sort of deferred to in the field. You manage to freeze out any competition. It's clear that Trump wasn't able to do that. He is the de facto standard bearer, but there's still people who think that they can be a better future leader of the party, clearly. Republicans probably going to have a lot of governors, currents and formers, vying for that position. But on the Democratic side, because Biden is still deciding, actively chewing this over, it's clear that that has frozen other Democrats in place. That's for a lot of reasons, especially that it's hard to run against a guy with the biggest bully pulpit in the nation. And that's what Biden has, being the sitting president. But if he were to decide not to run, the first place that everybody would look would be to his number two, Vice President Kamala Harris, the first woman in that role, someone who also ran for president herself in 2020 against Biden. So that's clearly someone who everyone would look to and wonder if this is the person who could assume the mantle. But there's definitely others, too. You and I know many of them well.
Well, I'll definitely keep checking my calendar to see when President Biden walks out. And thank you so much for covering 2024 since exactly the end of the midterms in 2022. Thank you so much, Ali Vitale.
Never too early.
Still ahead, bye-bye Brady. NFL quarterback Tom Brady announces his retirement again. The question is, will it be real this time? But first, today is the start of Black History Month, and every night in February, we'll bring you a moment in African-American history. Tonight marks the anniversary of the historic sit-in by the Greensboro Four. On February 1st, 1960, 4 young African-American men sat down at a lunch counter in North Carolina's Woolworths. And their actions turned out to be a significant move that took a stand against segregation. The men returned the next day, and their peaceful protests gained support in the months that followed. On July 25th, 1960, the Greensboro Woolworths agreed to serve Black people at its lunch counter. That week, more than 300 African-American diners were served there. One of the Greensboro Four was later quoted saying, "We didn't want to set the world on fire. We just wanted to eat." We'll be right back. WNBA All-Star Brittany Griner will return to basketball this summer after spending nearly 10 months in a Russian prison. She is now figuring out where she's going to play next. Right now, Griner is a free agent. Today is the first day free agents can officially sign. Griner says she plans to stay in Phoenix, where she has played her entire professional career. Now, Griner was part of a prisoner swap in Russia, with Russia, I should say, in December. Meanwhile, for the first time in Super Bowl history, two brothers will play against each other. Travis Kelce plays for the Chiefs. Jason Kelce plays for the Eagles. Their mom, Donna Kelce, who really can't lose, well, she was asked about the big game on the Today Show this morning.
I'll just be so elated. Probably some tears.
Yeah.
And just will be a very, very emotional moment.
What do you tell that son who doesn't win on Sunday? What do you say to him? How do you console him?
There isn't anything I could possibly say. Just give him a hug, and tell them that I love them. That's it. That's all you can do.
And definitely love her jersey. And Tom Brady is retiring again. The future Hall of Fame quarterback says this time is for good. NBC's Sam Brock has the story.
At this time a year ago, as in exactly this time a year ago, on February 1st, 2022, Tom Brady announced his intentions of retiring from football. Well, that lasted all of about 40 days. He came back to the Tampa Bay Bucs, as we know, got to the playoffs, but failed to win even a single game. Now, this time around, he's saying, that's it, I'm done. In a 52-second video posted to Twitter at 8 o'clock this morning, he said, I acknowledge what happened before. There's not going to be some long, drawn-out announcement with all of this emotion like last time. This is it. I'm out. But just to listen to his voice in that video, choked up and acknowledging his gratitude for his family and his friends that have supported him on this dream ride, you do get the impression that this probably is it for TB12. And the reason they call him the GOAT, the greatest of all time, is because he owns every possible record you could imagine in the NFL for a quarterback. But let's start with the most important one, Super Bowl rings. Brady has 7 of them. The next closest NFL player has 5. As far as quarterbacks are concerned, that's really your basis of comparison. Joe Montana and Terry Bradshaw are next with 4. So he's way above them, but also just the longevity of his career. This is someone who spent 23 years in the NFL. At one point in 2008, he tore his ACL and his MCL. He missed the last 15 games of that season. He did not miss another game due to injury for another 14 seasons. So basically, he was the Cal Ripken of the NFL, but also just so incredibly accomplished in terms of the records in a way that no other player in the league's history has ever done before. That's where we are right now. What is next for Tom Brady? He has a 10-year, $375 million contract with Fox Sports as a broadcaster. So there's that. He also has a health and wellness company, a clothing line. He's been certainly in TV and film. So there's a lot of different components to his personality, a lot of dimensions and careers that he can be pursuing outside of football. But for him, deep down in his DNA, that man just wanted to win. And that is what all athletes are going to remember Brady by, as he now, we think, steps away from the NFL. In Miami, Sam Brock, NBC News. Back to you.
An incredible career for Tom Brady with, I know, a lot of sacrifices. Thanks so much, Sam Brock, for that report. And coming up, tonight's Inspiring America, NBC's Harry Smith visits a restaurant run by grandmothers who know a thing or two about home cooking. But first, you gotta see this. An officer in Deer Park, Texas, put his life on the line to save his canine partner. This video shows Officer Joel Nitchman working to free his dog from the car as a tornado barreled towards them. Nitchman says, quote, the thought of debris or the car flipping over, I couldn't do that to him. I couldn't have him out there during that. Both made it out of the storm safely and soundly. We'll be right back. The word nonna in Italian means grandmother. For much of the past decade, a Staten Island restaurant has been bringing nonnas together to cook. We first visited the restaurant back in 2016. Since then, it's only grown in scope. Harry Smith takes us back into tonight's Inspiring America.
It's like a dream. Your beloved grandmother in the kitchen preparing family favorites.
Where were you born?
In Italia.
Is that where you learned how to cook?
Yeah. My nonna, my mother.
But Nonna Maria cooks for customers, not your cousins, at a restaurant in Staten Island.
Aren't you supposed to be retired?
I like to work. I like to do.
You like to work?
I like to come every day.
Grandma's in the Kitchen is the specialty of the house at Enoteca Maria.
It's magic.
Owner and proprietor Joe Scaravella.
I think the whole attraction with grandmothers, it's when you're growing up, that's like your safe space.
Over more than a decade, Scaravella has assembled a mini UN of abuelas, boobies, and nanas. Home cooking cuisines from Asia to the Middle East. Every night, a split menu, Italian and food from someplace else.
Something sort of magic happens every evening here. We're always anticipating what the different nonas bring.
I think I know plenty of grandmothers that aren't that good at cooking, but I've never seen one here. Oh, wow.
You want to try this too?
Especially when Nona Maria is holding forth.
You're a genius.
Oh, yeah? Thank you. When I come inside, my face is smile. I feel so good.
Us too. Harry Smith, NBC News, Staten Island.
And that, of course, looked delicious. So thank you, Harry Smith, for that reporting. And before we go, here are your 60 seconds of joy. Tonight, a green comet is expected to buzz by Earth for the first time in 50,000 years. If conditions are clear enough, stargazers will likely be able to catch a glimpse through binoculars or a telescope. And not to worry, it poses no threat, as the comet will be at minimum 26 million miles away. And today, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame unveiled their 2023 class of nominees. 14 groups and artists are under consideration for the prestigious honor. Among them, Missy Elliott, George Michael, Cyndi Lauper, Sheryl Crow, and A Tribe Called Quest. The top vote-getters will be announced in May. And speaking of musical icons, Queen Bee is getting back on the road. I'm so happy. And now Beyonce announced her long-awaited Renaissance World Tour this morning. She'll play 40 shows across North America and Europe, kicking off first in Stockholm, Sweden this May. The tour will be Beyonce's first solo tour in over 6 years. Definitely trying to get some tickets for that. And that does it for us. I'm Yami Shalsendor for Now Tonight. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.